body of Tim Miller's daughter, Laura, is one of 4 that turned up in this League City field between 1983 and 1991.
Why don't we want to solve this? This is a big deal here.
It was kind of a Wild West. There was a lot of good old boys type stuff going on.
I invented drive-by shootings in Dickinson, Texas. Yes, I fought Clyde Hedrick.
Wrong place, wrong time, you know, run into the devil sometimes.
Now we really have a reason for this to be called the damn killing fields. Laura's body was found, one of the things I was so pissed off about is I did everything I knew how to do to keep this little girl alive, and somebody else determined to take her life.
I wish there was somebody somewhere that would help. I'm still not going to quit.
I feel it's my responsibility, and it's the responsibility of our family to continue to get answers and justice for her.
And very, very, very early on, right after Laura's body was found, Clyde's name was brought up.
She has a massive skull fracture. I mean, and I don't mean a little hairline crack. We're talking a massive skull fracture that would absolutely cause death.
I don't see how that's possible.
Today's date is April the 4th. It's Thursday, and it's 8:42 a.m. I'm Lieutenant Tommy Hanson with Galveston County Sheriff's Office, Agent Renison with the FBI, and you're Clyde Edwin Hedrick, right?
Yes.
Okay. Clyde, you know the drill.
Ellen Beeson, along with a friend of hers, Candy Gifford, and Candy Gifford's husband, and a man named Clyde Hedrick had all been at Texas Moon, which is a club that was in League City, for a fundraiser. Ellen and Clyde Hedrick didn't really know each other. They might have met 1 or 2 times, but didn't have a relationship or anything like that. While the fundraiser was going on, a fight had occurred between Candy Gifford and her husband, because her boyfriend at the time, Clyde Hedrick, was kind of hanging around the table and...
Candy's boyfriend?
Candy's boyfriend, yes.
Okay.
And while her husband is in the same place with her, they end up getting into a fight and leaving, which leaves Ellen Beeson and Clyde Hedrick alone at the bar. And so he would have been the last one to see her. And then from there, he came up with kind of different stories of what had happened to her. My name is Kayla Allen, and I'm the first assistant here at the Galveston County District Attorney's Office.
She lived with her parents, and so the next day they found Ellen's car in the parking lot of the bar. And so they started calling around, primarily to Candy. Candy reached out to Clyde saying, where did she go? And he gave a couple of different statements. But at that point, she just became a missing person. My name is Kevin Petroff. I'm a former assistant district attorney at the Galveston County District Attorney's Office.
So the original story was that he and Ellen had left the bar and had gone to Candy Gifford's house. They drove by the house, no lights were on. And so they went back to the bar, and when they got out of the car, she started walking into a direction that he thought was her car, because remember, they didn't know each other. But she ended up getting into a vehicle with someone else. Basically, he left her alive walking in the parking lot. He went back in the bar.
I think the police bought it a little more than Candy Gifford bought it. I think with Candy, because her relationship with Clyde extended for several months after that, a year or so after that. So she kept at it. She kept asking him repeatedly, what happened to Ellen? Tell me again about what you say happened with Ellen. And over the time, his stories to her changed.
About 4 months into Candy pressuring Clyde Hedrick about where she was, he ended up saying, you want to know where she is? And she said, yes, I do. And he said, get in the car. And ended up driving her to Galveston Causeway. Area out there, it's kind of desolate, not a lot of stuff out there. It's a dumping ground. Have trash out there, tires out there. There was a car seat, not car seat as in baby car seat, but like a seat that had come out of a car.
Oh, an actual seat of a car,
yes.
yeah.
He took her out there and lifted up the seat and said, there's your friend, Ellen Beeson. And it was her remains, and she knew it was her remains because she still had her necklace on. And she recognized the necklace as Ellen's necklace.
There were threats made. He explained that you tell anybody, you could be here too. And I think threatened the rest of her family as well. So she didn't tell anybody initially. It wasn't for another probably 5 or 6 months before there was another fight between she and Clyde Hedrick when he burst into her home that she went to the police and told.
They went out there to look for the remains. It was nighttime, so it was kind of hard for her to remember exactly where it was because it had been several months since she had seen the area. They went back a day or two later in the daytime, and she was able to lead them to where Ellen Beeson's remains were, and they were able to lift up the same car seat that he had kind of put over to hide her, and her necklace and everything was still there. At that point, what he says is that him and Ellen Beeson left the bar together, so he admits that they were he was the last person with her. They went to the Dickinson sand pit where she wanted to skinny dip. He didn't want to. He didn't know her that well, but that she had taken her clothes off, jumped in the water, was trying to coax him into the water, and he didn't want to go in the water. And then he was just sitting on the back of the bed of the truck drinking a beer, and all of a sudden he couldn't hear any noise, so he flipped on his lights to his truck and saw that she was floating in the water. He walked into the water and grabbed her, and she wasn't alive, and he didn't want to be blamed for it. He didn't think anybody would believe him, and so he put her in the truck, went back to his sister's house, switched vehicles. Then he says he went back to the bar and I guess hung out there until closing time, and then drove around with her body trying to figure out what to do, and then he decided to dump her.
The situation for prosecutors at the time and law enforcement is, this is obviously a suspicious circumstance, finding a body buried this way. Candy Gifford had come and said that he put her there. But once the body was recovered, it was taken, as all bodies in this situation are, to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy. And what the autopsy concluded at the time from a Dr. Korndorfer was that there was no way to say how she died. The manner and means of death were couldn't be determined. So back then, prosecutors really, that put them at a disadvantage. And so the only charge that they brought at that time was a misdemeanor, which was abuse of a corpse, in that he drove around this dead person. That's the one thing they could prove.
I'm guessing the matter is closed at that point, or at least so everybody thought.
Correct. It was until League City decided in 1993 to exhume her body.
We know there was, as there have been for years, especially in the League City area, a task force that looked at the killing of young women. It's the Killing Fields, was obviously well known in this area. And so I think as part of that task force, Ellen Beason fit that profile. I mean, a woman that went missing, showed up dead in unusual circumstances, except for in this case, you actually have a suspect. They just couldn't make anything at the time. I think they wanted just a different set of eyes on the body, the remains of Miss Beason, and so they shipped it off to a forensic anthropology unit at the University of North Texas.
They send her remains off in 1994 to Dr. Gil King. And one of the things that he notices when he first gets the body is the skull and how it hadn't been defleshed. It still had all the tissue around it. So he was the person who defleshed it and removed the tissue from the skull. And when he removed the tissue, he saw a fracture that basically went from one end to the other of her skull. So Dr. Gil King had concluded that it was a homicide, that she had either been struck against something or with something. And so he made a determination it was a homicide. Just to have someone else look at it, another medical examiner, we then sent the body her remains to Dr. Mark Kraus, who was with the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's Office, and he also came up with the same conclusion that it was a homicide and that it was basically blunt force trauma to her skull.
Massive trauma is what they indicated. It was just a huge amount of force on this person's skull. This was done either with an object or against an object at or near the time of death.
And then from there, we sent her remains back to Dr. Korndorfer, where he looked at it again and continued to stick by what his original determination was, even though it had brought to his attention that he didn't deflesh the skull.
He was very clear in letters he wrote to Dr. Gil King and Dr. Kraus that was done post-mortem, meaning well after the death, that may have been something that was done during the disinterment or during their examination at the University of North Texas. And he remained convinced at the time that had nothing to do with the death of Ellen Beason.
How did he explain not defleshing the skull?
He simply denied it. He indicated that he had, in fact, defleshed the skull. Now, that was despite having photographs that Dr. Gil King took upon receiving the skull, which showed not only large portions of flesh on the skull, but exactly where the trauma was, exactly where the fracture was.
That would have been 1996, having both of their opinions and Dr. Korndorfer receiving the remains back and reevaluating it for a second time. And then she was put back into the ground, and that was it. Nothing happened with the reports or the information, so it just sat there.
Was there any notation as to what happened after just?
There really wasn't even anyone for us to ask, like, why didn't something happen? Why did you all decide not to do anything? It's just work stopped on the case.
In 2010 is when Richard Renison, Agent Renison with the FBI, there was a task force created, and him and Detective Tommy Hansen were on that task force. And it was important to Agent Renison because he used to work for the League City Police Department, and even though he didn't work on the case, he had heard about the case and kind of, heard information that had been passed around through the police department through those years, so he knew it existed and knew that it was still unsolved. And so in 2011, he received permission to open this case back up.
They knew Clyde Hedrick was attached. They knew he ditched the body. The question was, is it murder?
Not being an attorney, I didn't know if we would be able to even charge him with homicide if we were able to gather the evidence to do it, because he had the conviction of abuse of a corpse. And that's what Kevin Petroff and Jack Rohde were very integral in that, and they did their research and determined that yes, you can still file homicide even though he's been convicted of abuse of a corpse. My name is Richard Renison. I'm a retired special agent with the FBI.
I think it was apparent to most of us on our side of the fence, the law enforcement side, that there was more to that story than we were being given. And also, the main suspect in her case is also a key suspect in a number of other cases. So, we thought, well, if we could make him on one, that's better than nothing. Lieutenant Tommy Hansen, Galveston County Sheriff's Office, Major Crimes Unit, Cold Case Investigations.
We exhumed her in 2012, March of 2012, for a second time, that was a really tough decision to come by. We all felt it was the right decision, and we also did it with the blessing of the family.
She sent back to Dr. Gil King to confirm, because by now, like you said, it had been several years since he had looked at this body, and if it was something that our office was going to look at for charges, we wanted to make sure his opinion was the same. And so he was sent back to Dr. Gil King, and I believe Dr. Kraus looked at it again and had the same opinion that it was a homicide.
Let's start with Ellen Beeson.
Who's that? I know you showed me a bunch of pictures, but I can't remember the name of them.
Remember the name Ellen Beeson? Clyde is old school. He will let you interview him, but he will absolutely just not confess. I feel if we had Clyde on video, clear video showing him killing someone, he would still not confess and say, that's not me. That's just the way Clyde is.
He was cold-blooded, but he's one of those people you anticipate that going into the interview, because you've dealt with him before, other people have dealt with him before, you do your homework and you find out that's his personality, We're dealing with a possible serial killer. He's not going to have a warm blood in his system. We exhumed her body, means we dug it up,
right?
And you ought to see, the fracture is there. And that's what that's what we got to figure out, how it got there. So I need your help on telling us how it got there.
I don't know how it got there, because there's no way possible that, no way at all. Just don't make sense.
He never really denied so much in the interviews that he was there with her, but that he didn't kill her, that she drowned.
I can't remember all these names back then. There was several people there. I already went through all this crap and trial for that. But anyway, so we get ready to leave. She's taking a dip. Everybody starts leaving. She's riding with me. I got my sister's truck. I get stuck. So while I'm spinning, trying to get my truck getting out of stuck, I hollered for her, let's go. She ain't coming. I turned the truck around, shine the lights on the water, get out and holler at her, and she drowned. Now, me being all up and drunk, and then knowing that, she's been all doped up, like an idiot, I panicked. I put her in the truck, and I put her in the truck because I was going to Galveston to take her to the hospital. But I get halfway there, I realized this ain't gonna sound good, this ain't gonna look good, and I just set her down, figured I'd wait until I figured out what I was gonna do. And that's how that got involved.
When you drown, you sink to the bottom. Your lungs fill with water, and that's why you go to the bottom. So what he's saying is factually not correct, because he said he tried CPR and water just kept coming out. If her lungs were filled with water, she wouldn't have been floating.
You're saying that you and her were the only ones there and she was fine?
Yes.
Everyone else is gone. Next thing you know, she's dead. She's got a massive skull fracture.
I just don't believe that.
Well,
I know,
I don't know
There's no way in hell. I just don't understand.
Yes, there is a way in hell. Because it happened. You know, this isn't a theory we have. This isn't something we're saying, well, maybe she had a skull fracture. No, she had a skull fracture.
But I don't know how it got there, my point.
We had received more information, kind of a third story. When he was in jail, there was an inmate who had given information that he was talking about a female dying at the Dickinson sand pit. Kind of explained it, sort of the same story at the beginning of they went out there to skinny dip, she was out there swimming, he didn't hear anymore, turned on his lights, saw her floating. He walked in there, grabbed her, put her in his vehicle, and explained that when he went to go dump her body, that she came to, that she wasn't dead, which scared him because he thought that she was, and that he had picked up a table leg that was out there kind of like in the trash and everything and hit her in the head with it.
Texas law is very suspicious of jailhouse informants, or as they're commonly known, jailhouse snitches. Basically, you cannot make a case based on that. You have to corroborate have to have enough corroborative evidence to show that the person charged was actually involved in the murder. A bigger hurdle came from when suddenly, when we approached them years later, the medical examiner's office told us that they did not have the file or any of the photographs from the autopsy from the original. So that was certainly a problem that we had. What we had was Dr. Gilking's full report, all of his photos, same with Dr. Kraus. We also had the correspondence between Dr. Korndorfer and Dr. Gilking, where Dr. Korndorfer was saying, this wasn't my mistake, this was your mistake, I defleshed the skull. And so we knew that there were files, we knew this was going to be an issue at trial, but we didn't have the medical examiner file. Finally, we were able to get a meeting with Dr. Korndorfer, who had long since retired. We met with him at his home, and at that point, he presented us with the file on Ellen Beason, which had the original autopsy report, as well as most of the autopsy photos. And that's when he explained, it turns out we had these in a storage unit in Houston, and so that was a big break for us. It was a very positive, very weird situation, but suddenly I'm opening up a binder of slides, and slides were in each of their little envelopes that you're going through. And so I think we both thought, well, this is great. We're going to finally get an answer of, was the skull defleshed or not? But in that very same moment, we get to this, what should have been photos of the skull, and they had been pulled out of the little slide holders. They were missing. And he indicated he had no idea where those would have been or why those had been taken out. So we had photographic evidence of every other aspect of Ellen Beason's autopsy, except for her skull where the fracture was.
Did he explain how he had that file?
He did explain that it was unusual that they would have taken it and put it in his personal storage. He could not explain the missing slides, but he was adamant that he had done nothing wrong in this case. He testified that this was the only case where he had taken home an entire file with photographs.
So how do you address that?
We had to basically accuse him of, tampering with this evidence to hide a failure that he had made decades before. And it was an unpleasant cross-examination. He was angry. But it's something that I think the jury pretty quickly was able to see, well, there was some misdoing here.
think what we wanted to make sure that everyone remembered in the end, like for closing the jury and just the public, is how much Ellen Beason had gone through. In the end, it was about her. It was about Ellen Beason, and we wanted to make sure that everybody remembered she was a 29-year-old, lovable, outgoing, well-liked girl, woman who was, early in her life.
The difference between manslaughter and murder is really the intent, and whether it's an intent to kill or a reckless act that led to a death. And because we couldn't really tell them exactly what the mechanism of her murder was, I think they tended to lean more towards where this could have been reckless as opposed to intentional. For a guy who had dodged justice and for just decades, and a cold case from that far back, we were very happy with the jury's verdict. I think a large reason that we got the maximum sentence on the manslaughter charge was because of the testimony about the way he lived his life. And that primarily came from his daughter, who just told horrifying stories of the house that she grew up in and how he was a predator around her at all times. It was very emotional testimony, and I think it really struck the jury.
He sexually assaulted me. He sodomized me. I was a little kid. The first incident with him, I was 10, 11 years old. It was at a swimming pool. I'm Marla, and Clyde Hedrick was my stepdad. He's very manipulative and calculated. Evil. There's a lot that people should know. He never takes responsibility for what he's ever done. He's always denied everything. He would tell me there were certain things that boys liked and boys wanted, and certain things, that I should be doing in the shower when I'm in there. Little did I know that he had a peephole watching me the whole time. The only person he's ever cared about is himself. It's always been about what he wanted. I know the truth. He knows the truth. He knows. He could say whatever he wants, but he knows. He knows what he did.
One of the things that we gave notice of that came from a jailhouse snitch that we couldn't corroborate and didn't come into trial was that he was involved in the death of Laura Miller. So we put that in a court document that provided that notice to the defense. What I didn't realize is that Tim Miller, the father of Laura Miller, was watching this case very closely. He knew Clyde Hedrick, and he saw that filing. And so I got an understandably upset call from Tim Miller. And so we had to sit down, and that's when I got to meet him.
In 1988, I went by Clyde Hedrick's house in Dickinson, Texas, which he didn't live in the same house he did when Laura disappeared. I went by his house, did drive-by shooting on his house. I invented drive-by shootings in Dickinson, Texas. Yes, I fought Clyde Hedrick.
I've already been doing this for 44 years. Tim Miller got in his head that I'm the one that killed his daughter because I was supposed to be living down the street with him.
How is it you are connected to all these women and they all end up dead?